Section 1. The spark that lit the fire, the crash of 1929. It began with a sound, the frantic ringing of telephone bells on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, a rising chorus of shouts, a cascade of paper slips, each one a testament to vanished fortunes. The year was 1929. America was riding the crest of a decade of unprecedented prosperity, the Roaring Twenties. Jazz, flapper dresses, a seemingly endless upward climb in the stock market. Many ordinary people, not just the wealthy, had been drawn into the intoxicating game of speculation. They believed that share prices could only go up. They bought on margin, borrowing money to purchase stocks, confident that the profits would easily cover the loans. It was a grand, glittering bubble. Then, in late October, the bubble burst. On a day that would forever be known as Black Tuesday, the market collapsed. Panic selling began. Prices plummeted with a terrifying velocity. The ticker tapes could not keep up with the sheer volume of trades. They ran hours behind, leaving investors in suspended dread. The immediate shock was profound. After the stock market crash, fear spread from Wall Street into the American banking system. In the 1920s, banks were mostly small, local operations with limited reserves. There was no federal insurance for deposits. If a bank failed, customers lost everything. Some banks lost money directly by investing in stocks. Others were harmed when borrowers who bought stocks defaulted. That left many banks with perilously weak foundations. The public began to lose faith in banks. Rumors could spark panic. People rushed to withdraw their savings in cash. Bank runs became a common and dreadful sight. Long lines of anxious depositors formed outside bank doors. Banks don't keep all deposits as cash. They lend most of it out. Even a healthy bank could not survive a sustained run. It would be forced to close, locking away late savers' life savings. One bank's failure often triggered a domino effect. Neighboring towns heard the news and started their own runs. Between 1930 and 1933, thousands of banks failed, wiping out billions. Ordinary families and small businesses were devastated. Savings set aside for a home savings, for their children's education savings for old age. For businesses, credit, the lifeblood of commerce, dried up. Section 3. The long silence of the factories, mass unemployment. With banks failing, credit markets frozen, the nation's industries began to grind to a halt. The vibrant hum of factories was replaced by an eerie silence. Businesses facing a public with no money to spend saw their sales plummet. Their response was predictable and brutal. They began to slash costs in a desperate attempt to survive. The first and most painful cost to be cut was labor. Millions of workers received the dreaded pink slip informing them that their services were no longer required. The scale of the job losses was staggering and unprecedented in American history. By 1933, the unemployment rate in the United States reached its peak. It is estimated that nearly 25% of the entire labor force was out of work. That is 1 in every 4 people who wanted a job. In some industrial cities like Toledo, Ohio. Section 4. A global sickness. How the crisis spread. The economic illness that began in the United States did not stop at its borders. In the interconnected world of the early 20th century, the American collapse quickly became a global pandemic. The United States was not just a major producer. It was the world's largest consumer. It was its primary creditor. When the American economy faltered, countries around the globe felt the impact almost immediately. Nations that relied on exporting their goods to the vast American market saw their sales evaporate. Coffee, sugar, rubber, copper. Demand simply vanished. Prices for these commodities collapsed on the world market. American banks and investors had been a crucial source of loans for many countries, particularly in Europe, still rebuilding from the devastation of the First World War. When the crisis hit, American lenders began to call in their foreign loans. Section 5. The limits of belief. Herbert Hoover's response. When the crisis began, the man in the White House was Herbert Hoover. He was an engineer by training, a self-made millionaire, a respected administrator and humanitarian, noted for organizing food relief in Europe after World War I. He seemed on paper the perfect man for the job. Yet his response to the Depression is widely regarded as a failure, not because he was callous, but because he was bound by the prevailing economic and political philosophy of his time. That philosophy proved tragically inadequate for the scale of the disaster. Hoover's core belief, rugged individualism. He thought the American character was built on self-reliance, hard work, private initiative. He feared direct government aid would create dependency and undermine the nation's moral fiber. Relief, he believed, should come from local governments, charities, private citizens helping their neighbors. The federal role should be limited. In the presidential election of 1932, Americans were desperate for a change. They found it in the form of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the charismatic governor of New York. Roosevelt, or FDR as he was known, was a stark contrast to the dour Hoover. He exuded confidence and optimism. During his campaign, he promised a new deal for the American people. While the details were vague, the message of hope and action resonated powerfully with a nation mired in despair. He won the election in a landslide. His inauguration in March 1933 marked a pivotal turning point. Roosevelt's approach was fundamentally different from Hoover's. He believed the federal government must act boldly and decisively to combat the crisis. His philosophy was pragmatic experimentation. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. In his first 100 days, he launched a whirlwind of legislative activity. His first act was to declare a national bank holiday, closing every bank in the country for several days. This stopped the panic and gave the government time to inspect the banks and only allow the healthy ones to reopen, restoring public trust. Beyond the statistics of unemployment and bank failures lies the profound human story of the Great Depression. For millions of ordinary Americans, the 1930s was a decade defined by struggle, uncertainty, loss. Daily life became a relentless quest for the basic necessities, food, shelter, and work. The sight of bread lines and soup kitchens became a grim fixture, as once proud families were forced to rely on charity to avoid starvation. In many households, meals became meager affairs, often consisting of little more than potatoes or bread. Malnutrition became a serious problem, particularly among children. The loss of a home was a common and heartbreaking experience. When families could no longer afford their mortgage or rent, they were evicted, their belongings often piled unceremoniously on the pavement. Some moved in with relatives, crowding into already cramped living spaces. Others, with nowhere else to go, drifted. They built makeshift shelters in the aforementioned Hoovervilles on the edges of cities. The Great Depression and the New Deal response fundamentally and permanently altered the relationship between the American people and their government. Before the 1930s, the prevailing ideal was a limited federal government playing a minimal role in citizens' lives and the economy. The catastrophic failure of that approach during the Depression led to a profound shift in political and social thinking. Americans began to look to Washington for solutions, and the New Deal set a precedent for a more active federal government. One enduring legacy was the creation of a national social safety net. The Social Security Act of 1935 was a landmark law. It established old-age pensions for retirees, unemployment insurance, financial aid for dependent children, aid for people with disabilities. For the first time, the federal government formally acknowledged a responsibility to protect citizens from economic insecurity. This was a revolutionary change in the American social contract. The Great Depression was more than just a chapter in a history book. It was a defining national trauma that has left deep and lasting echoes. The lessons learned from that decade of hardship continue to shape economic policy and political debate today. Perhaps the most fundamental lesson was the instability of unregulated financial markets. The idea that markets would always correct themselves was proven tragically false. The Depression showed government must set the rules, regulating banks, policing stock markets, ensuring basic stability to protect society. A second lesson is the importance of a social safety net. The suffering of the 1930s showed the brutal human cost of having no support mechanisms. Programs like unemployment insurance, social security are not just charity, they act as economic stabilizers. By providing income to those who lost jobs or retired, they help sustain consumer demand, preventing the collapse in spending that deepened the Depression. That idea, a societal floor below which citizens cannot fall, is a direct legacy, and compassionate, pragmatic crisis responses are essential for survival and renewal. The stories became instant legends of powerful executives leaping from office windows. Though such tales were more myth than reality, the true horror was quieter and far more widespread. The crash was not just a financial event, it was a psychological one. It shattered the unshakable confidence that had defined the era. The belief in endless growth, in the certainty of American capitalism, was broken. People who had felt secure just a week before were suddenly faced with ruin. The wealth lost was not merely abstract numbers on a page. Homes, savings accounts, dreams of a better future for their children. The initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a cold, creeping fear. This fear spread from Wall Street to every corner of the nation, and eventually the world. The stock market crash of 1929 did not, in isolation, cause the Great Depression. Many historians point to deeper systemic weaknesses in the 1920s economy: overproduction of goods, unequal distribution of wealth, a fragile international financial system. However, the crash acted as the definitive trigger, the loud, violent crack that signaled the breaking of the entire structure. It exposed vulnerabilities lurking beneath the surface of the boom. The immediate aftermath was financial carnage and profound human shock. The federal role should be limited: encourage and coordinate, not provide direct welfare. Hoover tried to rally the nation's leaders. He held White House conferences, urging business owners not to cut wages and to keep investing. He asked labor leaders. He later created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to lend to banks and large businesses, hoping benefits would trickle down. But as the Depression deepened, these measures were far too little, far too late. Private charities and local governments were overwhelmed. They ran out of resources. Hoover's reluctance to offer direct federal aid made him seem aloof and uncaring. His name became associated with suffering. Shanty towns sprang up, Hoovervilles. Newspapers used as blankets, Hoover blankets. The New Deal was a vast array of programs and reforms, often referred to by their acronyms, an alphabet soup of agencies. They can be categorized by the 3 R's: relief, recovery, reform. Relief programs provided immediate help to the unemployed and needy. The Civilian Conservation Corps put millions of young men to work on conservation projects. Recovery programs aimed to get the economy moving again. The Public Works Administration funded large construction projects like dams, bridges, and schools, creating jobs and improving infrastructure. Reform sought to address root causes and prevent future catastrophes. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial and investment banking and created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to insure deposits. This reform effectively ended the scourge of bank runs. The Securities and Exchange Commission was established to regulate the stock market and prevent reckless speculation that led to the 1929 crash. The New Deal did not end the Depression. That would only truly happen with the massive government spending of World War II. But it changed the role of government and provided a lifeline to millions. It really reshaped expectations about what government could and should do. These communities, cobbled together from packing crates, scrap metal and cardboard, were a stark and visible symbol of the nation's poverty. They were often unsanitary and dangerous, but they provided a form of shelter and community for the dispossessed. The crisis was not confined to the cities. In the agricultural heartland of the Great Plains, a natural disaster compounded the economic one. A severe and prolonged drought, combined with years of farming practices that had stripped the topsoil of its protective grasses, created the Dust Bowl. The soil turned to dust, and massive, dark clouds of it were lifted by the wind into terrifying storms known as black blizzards. These storms buried fences, choked livestock, making the Democrats dominant for decades. The Depression forced America to rethink government, and the nation that emerged was profoundly different. It really remade the country. Earlier beat pickup. Their journey, immortalized in John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath, was one of hardship and exploitation. They were often met with hostility, seen as unwelcome competitors for the few available jobs. The lives of these migrant families, like those in the Hoovervilles and the bread lines, revealed the deep and personal scars that the Great Depression inflicted upon the American people. It was a really harsh time for so many. The crisis also taught the danger of protectionism. The Smoot-Hawley tariff and retaliations choked off world trade and made things worse. In a connected world, economic nationalism is self-defeating. That lesson shaped the post-war dual time order and led to institutions aimed at cooperation. International Monetary Fund, World Bank, a prosperous society can be brought to its knees by flawed economic structures and a crisis of confidence. But people adapt, communities come together, and a nation can reinvent itself. The ultimate lesson: prosperity is fragile. Institutions need constant vigilance, and compassionate, pragmatic crisis responses are essential for survival and renewal.